My parents never noticed me. On my 21st birthday, they gave my brother a watch. I left that night. My dad called 2 weeks later. Please, come back. I was 19 when I began counting down the days until my 21st birthday. Not because I was eager to become an adult, but because I knew it was the day I could finally go. My name is Ethan, and I grew up in a house that appeared picture perfect from the outside. 2-story white shutters, a large oak tree in the front yard, but inside it always felt like I was inhaling someone else's air, as if I was a visitor in a house that didn't want me. My brother Luke is 3 years younger than me. And he has always been the golden boy. I don't mean this in a petty older brother sense. I mean, he could actually slam the family car into the mailbox and people would inquire if he was all right. Meanwhile, I once neglected to vacuum before supper and was grounded for a week. Growing up, I learned how to live quietly. I did not want to give them an excuse to be furious. When I stepped into a room, the tone of my father's voice changed, tight and clipped, as if I were an unsolved problem. My mother wasn't doing any better. She didn't shout, but she had this way of gazing straight through me, as if I were someone else's child who had stumbled into the wrong house. Luke, on the other hand, had that effortless grin, charisma, and knack for being at the right place at the right time. He was a miraculous baby after a string of miscarriages. He was the one that made it. I believe my parents decided right then and then that he was unique, and everything else disappeared. Still, I tried. I had decent marks. I remained out of trouble. I worked part-time stacking shelves at the grocery store to save money for college since I knew they wouldn't help. Every time the subject turned to my future, my father would just grunt and say, "You're smart. You'll figure it out." Luke, on the other hand, received a new laptop for his 16th birthday since he required it for school, even though he spent most of his time playing games and scrolling TikTok. I recall asking my mother if I could borrow it once to fill out college applications. She said, "Ask your brother." I did. He said no. So, when my 21st birthday finally arrived, I wasn't expecting anything. Perhaps a card or a family supper. I hadn't even expected a present. I simply needed, I don't know, a minute to appreciate that I'd survived 21 years in a house that barely tolerated me. That they may have seen me. My birthday fell on a Saturday that year. I didn't have to work, so I got up late and came downstairs expecting someone to wish me a happy birthday. Instead, I found my father in the kitchen wrapping a knot around a sleek black box and Luke bouncing on his heels like a child on Christmas morning. I stood there, half drowsy, observing this little exchange between them as if I were intruding. My mom smiled and said, "Perfect timing, come on Luke. Open it." Nobody glanced at me. Nobody even noticed that I hadn't spoken yet. Luke ripped open the package and let out a phony gasp, as if he had just won the jackpot. Inside was a silver expensive-looking watch with a leather band and Roman numbers. "Oh my God, Dad, this is very sick." Luke grinned as he slipped it onto his wrist. "Now I don't need to borrow your old one." My father chuckled and ruffled his hair. "Well, you deserve it, child. You've been working so hard recently." Hard. The kid's biggest success that week was reaching second base with a female from his chemistry class. I gazed at them, motionless, hoping that someone would recall why the day was important. My mother eventually looked over at me and said, "Ethan, don't look so bitter. It's not always about gifts. When you get older, you'll realize that what matters is who you become, not what you get." It hit me like a slap. She stated it in that calm, condescending tone she often used when she tried to appear intelligent, as if I were some greedy kid who didn't understand. I attempted to nod along, but my throat clenched. "I thought we were having cake," I murmured. "Oh, we did it before," Luke remarked nonchalantly. "I blinked while you were asleep. Did you have cake without me?" My mother promptly answered. "It was just a small thing. Nothing major." "Whose name was on it?" The stillness was just a beat too long. Then Luke grinned and said, "Mine? I mean, it was a cooperative effort. But it is not your birthday." "Don't be dramatic," my father yelled. "It's only a cake." I wanted to shout. I wanted to chuck something. Instead, I laughed. It was harsh, short, and did not sound like me. I laughed because if I didn't, I'd weep right in front of them, and I didn't want to give them any satisfaction. Luke lifted an eyebrow, as if I were the crazy one. My mother gave me this expression of sorrow and despair, as if I had ruined a perfectly fine day. That night, when I walked up to my room, I didn't even switch on the light. I sat on my bed for a long time, gazing at the floor, and attempting to swallow the knot in my throat. I maintained my thoughts. They're never going to love you the way you want them to. It doesn't matter what you do. It doesn't matter how hard you try. You're never going to be Luke. I finally decided to act. I grabbed my bag and packed it with a hoodie, a water bottle, a couple granola bars, and the $50 I'd hidden in an envelope in the back of my sock drawer. I did not have a plan. Not really. But I had my ID, a phone charger, and a bus timetable that I had covertly printed from the library weeks earlier. At midnight, when the house was quiet and everyone was sleeping, I snuck out the back door and didn't look back. I expected to be gone for a day or two. Maybe stay in the refuge near the downtown church. Maybe look for a part-time work or couch surf if I can find someone nice enough. I did not know. I knew I could not remain. What I didn't anticipate was that 2 weeks later, my phone would ring with a number I hadn't seen in days. My dad. I let it ring the first 2 times, then on the third, I answered. Before I could say anything, his voice broke through, choked up and just above a whisper. "Your room's still here," he said. "Please pick up, just tell me where you are. Please." I sensed something had changed. I just wasn't sure what or why, and the bit that terrified me the most. I wasn't sure whether I wanted to go back. I did not go back. Not that week. Not the next. And not after the voicemail. My father departed 2 days later. This time, quieter and angrier. "I don't know what you think you're proving, Ethan, but this isn't how family works. You don't just vanish." That line made me giggle a little. Ironic, given that I had spent my whole life feeling like a ghost in that mansion. I remained gone. I bounced around. First there was the church shelter, followed by this little room for rent managed by Lynn, a retired mechanic with a soft heart for stray dogs and humans. I gave him what I could afford, $130 per week for a mattress in the corner of his garage, which he had walled off with plywood and curtains. It smelled of grease and iron, yet it was warm. And for the first time, I didn't have to follow someone else's rules in order to live. I obtained part-time employment unloading trucks at a shipping warehouse and spent the rest of my time filling out college applications at the public library, whose computers timed out every 30 minutes. I did not inform anyone where I was. I didn't want them to locate me until I had something to show for it. But they ultimately found me. It was Luke who arrived first. I was heading out of the library one afternoon when I noticed him resting against a vehicle that was clearly too lovely for him. New model with beautiful black paint and leather seats. He had not noticed me yet. He was glancing at his phone, seemed bored. I froze. My impulse was to turn and flee, but curiosity kept me in place. He noticed me a second later and smirked, as if I were late for an event I had no idea I had been invited to. "There you are," he said, sliding his phone inside his jacket. "You look like crap, bro." "Thanks," I replied bluntly. "Seriously though, Mom's freaking out. Dad's being weird. You made your point. Okay, come home." "I'm not coming home." He looked at his wife. "Come on, man. You had your little tantrum. Now everyone's waiting for you to crawl back so things can go back to normal." The term normal struck me like a brick. "You mean where my birthday cake had your name on it?" I requested an explanation. "That kind of normal?" He shrugged as if I had brought up the weather. "It was just a mix-up. You always take things so seriously. They didn't mean anything by it." "You're right," I told them. "They never mean anything by it. That's the problem." His smile faded. "Look, I don't know what kind of sob story you're telling yourself, but you're not the only one with problems, okay? You don't see me running away." "No," I told you, "you just see the world bending to make sure you don't have to." That hit home. His jaw stiffened. "Whatever. Just know that when you finally come back, don't expect a parade. They've been bending over backwards trying to reach you." I nodded slowly. "Yeah. Did they tell you what they said the night I left?" He did not respond. I did not expect him to. "Tell them I'm fine," I said, moving away. "And if they're really so worried, they can stop calling my number and start thinking about why I stopped picking up." After a week or two, I began to hear less from them. No more voicemails or texts. I assumed they'd given up and moved on, most likely converting my bedroom into a storage area, a mini home gym, or whatever project they could think of to fill the stillness. I assumed that was the end of it, until I received an email. Not from my parents, but from my high school counselor, Mrs. Dureau. It was brief and uncomfortable, as if she wasn't sure whether to be worried or polite. She expressed her wish that I was safe and well, but she wanted to inform me that my transcripts had been requested and revoked. According to the system, my parents called the school and informed them that I would not be attending college and that all further application communication should be cancelled. I sat there in the library, gazing at the screen and not breathing. I read it again, then a third time. They attempted to eliminate me. I contacted the school right away, my pulse hammering, and happily, Mrs. Devo answered. I described everything. She verified it with an apology, but it was evident she had not heard the entire tale. I spent the following 2 days untangling the mess and ensuring that my applications were not damaged. Several deadlines had already passed. I passed up a scholarship offer that I had a legitimate shot at. That night, I did not sleep. I kept replaying the email in my brain, thinking what type of individuals go out of their way to stifle their own child's potential. It was no longer about control. It was sabotage. I didn't seek vengeance, not yet. What I wanted was to disappear so completely from their story that one day they'd have to explain to someone why their firstborn son never returned home. But fate had other ideas. Because 1 month later, I received a letter in the mail. An actual letter, paper and envelope with no return address, only my name written in my father's handwriting. Inside, there was no apology. There was a list, a genuine bullet-pointed list of things you had to complete before we could speak about you returning home. It had gems such as, stop blaming others for your unhappiness. Apologize for walking out and ghosting your family. Recognize the sacrifices we made for you. Understand that we do what we do out of love. I read it silently. Then I laughed, because what else could I do? It was not a letter. It was a contract. Another method to make me the issue. A technique to entice me back into the cycle of guilt, responsibility, and performance. I crumpled it, threw it in the garbage and told myself for the umpteenth time that I was finished. But then came a moment that altered everything. It happened in the early spring. I'd started working longer hours at the warehouse to save for community college. When Lynn entered the garage one evening with a hefty packet, he claimed someone had been by earlier, inquired whether Ethan lived here and gave it over without saying anything. I opened it gently. Inside was a legitimate legal letter from a lawyer's office. It said that I was being removed as a dependent from my parents' tax records retrospectively, that I was no longer regarded a member of their household and that I had until the end of the month to retrieve any remaining personal stuff from their property before it was disposed of at the homeowner's discretion. There was a sticky note attached. The only thing it said was, "This is what consequences look like. Sign Mom." That was the switch. I felt something inside me stiffen and solidify. It wasn't rage. It was not even sadness. It was clarity. They didn't only want to injure me. They were attempting to eliminate me. And if they wanted to play that game, they had no clue who I was going to be. I didn't talk for 2 days after receiving the letter. Lynn noticed. He did not press me. He just passed an extra sandwich across the workbench over lunch and said, "Whatever it is, kid. It won't last forever. Not if you don't let it." I nodded, but I didn't believe him. Rock bottom may not necessarily appear like a catastrophic fall. Sometimes it's simply silent, a deep aching that stays in your chest and never goes away. It's going home from a double shift, fingers aching, boots drenched, and realizing you don't have a house, only a garage with no insulation and a curtain for privacy. At 3 a.m., it is sitting in the cold room. With your hoodie pulled over your face, you realize your family has written you off as a terrible investment. They weren't quite finished with me. They punished me for leaving. I didn't even have anything to return for. A few clothing and a shelf of books I had accumulated over the years. My guitar if it hadn't already been sold or discarded. But even so, I felt hollow. Knowing that my name, space and existence in that house were being washed clean as if I were a blemish on their flawless family image. Worst of all, I nearly broke down. That week, I skipped 2 shifts. I didn't respond when Len knocked. I didn't check my email, eat much, or sleep. I just laid there, listening to the wind blow against the garage door, wondering what I was doing now. But then something silly rescued me. A book. No, not just any book. My book. I believed I had lost it during the transfer. It was buried in the bottom of my rucksack, a dog-eared copy of John Cracker's Into the Wild. I have read it 3 times previously. But that night, I flicked it open and came upon a statement I had marked in red ink years earlier. Happiness is only real when shared. It should have made me feel bad. Instead, It made me sit up because I realized I was attempting to share my life with people who did not want it. I continued sending away bits of myself, expecting that someone would say, "We see you, you matter." But they never did. That is not the family I was born into, and I couldn't change them, I could only alter myself. The next morning I returned to work. I apologized to my boss for missing shifts and volunteered to take the graveyard position for the following 2 weeks to compensate. He didn't ask any questions, just growled and handed me a credential for the nightly staff. The task was tougher, with heavier boxes and colder nights, but I didn't mind. I needed it. That was the start of my reconstruction. Quiet, uncomplicated, and mine. Over the following 6 months, I settled into a groove. Wake up, work, read, sleep, and repeat. I started saving every additional money. To save money on my phone bill, I downloaded budgeting applications, eliminated superfluous expenses, and even quit using data. Len noticed and began assigning me more duties in order to gain credit toward rent. Sometimes he'd give me a $20 and claim it was for groceries, as if I hadn't just cleaned his entire vehicle engine. I applied to community college again, this time without the support of my parents, and paid the application cost on my own. I sobbed after submitting a brutally honest essay. I did not sugarcoat anything. I talked about growing up unseen, how silence can speak louder than words, and how you can create yourself from scratch when no one gives you the tools. Things gradually began to change. One night, while scrubbing the warehouse floor, I overheard 2 logistics employees grumbling about a shipment software error. I'd learned a little coding through an online course I'd been taking. Nothing significant, simply a free Python class, but I provided a solution anyway. They dismissed it at first, but 2 days later, one of them grabbed me aside and said, "Hey, that thing you mentioned, it worked." Before I knew it, I was unofficially the man people went to when their computers stopped or their printers went berserk. I didn't get a promotion or a title, but people started remembering my name, thanking me and seeing me. It was a strange feeling. The type of strange that makes you sit with it for a while and think, maybe I'm not just background noise. My first significant triumph occurred in early summer. I received an email from the community college. Accepted with a scholarship too. Not a full ride, but enough to cover tuition if I continued working part-time. I recall looking at the computer, repeating the word congrats over and again, as if it might vanish if I blinked too hard. Lynn allowed me to use his kitchen that night to prepare a packaged cake. It turned out uneven and little scorched, but I didn't mind. I used blue icing to write my name on it. Ethan is just Ethan. There was no communal celebration, no forgotten candle or lecture. It was just me. A dilapidated garage was the first thing I'd ever made with my own hands. I did not call my parents, I did not tell them, but I figured they'd figure it out eventually since people speak, especially in our town. And sure enough, one day at the grocery store, I ran across an old neighbor, Mrs. Langford, a sweet lady who used to slip me cookies when my mother wasn't looking. When she spotted me, she smiled broadly and said, "I heard you're going to college. Your mom must be so proud." I just nodded and muttered, "Yeah, must be." But I knew otherwise. They were not proud. They were presumably upset that I had done it without them. And I was fine with it since their approval was no longer the currency I needed. Later that week, I received a call from an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. It was my mother. She did not weep. She did not shout. She just responded, "We heard about school. I'm glad you're doing well, and I hope you remember where you came from." I played that phrase 5 times, as if I were a straying stray who needed to return to his kennel. But I didn't feel furious. I felt liberated. By the end of the summer, I had moved out of Lynn's garage. I found a shared apartment near university with 2 housemates who stayed to themselves and did not ask questions. I began schooling and secured a part-time IT position at the school's help desk. It was not glamorous, but it paid the bills. And gradually, I began to construct something resembling a life. I still had emotional wounds. I still cringed whenever people raised their voices. Still questioning praises. Still found myself apologizing for taking up space. But I was learning. Healing is not loud. It is not always dramatic. Sometimes it's as simple as having coffee in a quiet room and recognizing you're no longer frightened to be noticed. One night, I opened a fresh notebook and jotted down a list of realities, things I'd learned, things no one could take from me. At the top I added, "You don't need permission to be someone they never imagined." And under it, "Your worth isn't measured by someone else's disappointment. You can start over, even when they say you can't. Family isn't who you're born to, it's who roots for you in the quiet. I closed the notebook, turned off the light and slept better than I had in years, but I should have known it wasn't over. Because just when I thought I was finally free, something happened that pulled me right back in. It started with a message request. Late one night, I was reviewing my notes for an upcoming midterm, sitting on the floor of my apartment with a half-eaten burrito and 3 open tabs on laptop troubleshooting. Mrs. Langford, my parents' old neighbor, the one with the garden that used to spill into our backyard, was always kind but distant, friendly in the way that suburban neighbors are. I hadn't used Facebook in months, if not longer, and had only kept the account open in case of emergencies or identity verification. I hadn't spoken to her in years, and the message was simple. Hey Ethan, I wasn't sure if I should say anything, but I thought you had the right to know. Your parents listed your childhood home for sale and the sign just went up this week. I hope you're doing well. I stared at the message, then reread it. The house was up for sale. Our house. For a second, I didn't feel anything. Just blankness. Then something flickered. Not quite sadness, not quite anger, but something else. Something sharper, colder. I'd always assumed they'd sell eventually. That once Luke graduated or moved out, they'd downsize or relocate to some gated community with a warning label on the HOA newsletter. But the fact that it was now, after everything, after cutting me off, after pretending I never existed, something about the timing didn't feel right. So, I did what any reasonably curious person would do. I opened Zillow. It didn't take long to find the listing, which was a bright, overexposed photo of our front porch. The white shutters were cleaned up, the old oak tree was still casting a crooked shadow across the lawn, and the description was flowery and fake, a charming family home with rich character, lovingly maintained for over 2 decades, with 4 bedrooms, custom finishes, and a quiet neighborhood. I scrolled through the photos, living room, kitchen, master bedroom, and bedroom 1, and clicked. My breath caught. They'd turned my room into a guest suite, with neutral walls, beige bedding, and generic art prints on the walls. Every trace of me was gone, no posters, no desk, no shelves, no indication that someone had spent 18 years growing up in that space, as if I'd never existed. They didn't just push me out. They erased me. That's when the idea began to form. That weekend, I borrowed a collared shirt from my roommate, printed a fake pre-approval letter using a free online template, and booked a tour through the real estate site using a burner Gmail. I wasn't looking for vengeance at the time, but rather curiosity. I didn't know what I was expecting when I pulled up to the curb in a borrowed car, maybe a rush of emotion, nostalgia, bitterness. But mostly I just felt numb. The porch creaked like it used to, and the front door still had the scratch near the bottom where I'd once tried to sneak in a stray cat, and the real estate agent, a perky woman named Sasha with 2 white teeth, had no idea she was walking through a landmine. So the sellers are really motivated, she chirped, looking for a quick close. They've already moved most of their personal belongings out, looking to downsize now that their youngest is off to college. I nodded politely, letting her guide me from room to room. I barely listened. My focus was on the walls, the spaces, the energy, and the gaping absence of me. When we got to the backyard, I paused. The fence was newer. Luke must have helped build it, or at least posed for a photo while someone else did. The treehouse I'd built with my uncle when I was 12 and still had hope, was gone, ripped down. I'll give you a minute, Sasha said, sensing something in my silence. I nodded and walked toward the back fence, keeping my hands in my pockets to keep them from shaking. That night, I sat in my car long after the engine had cooled down. And I knew it wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was war. They wanted to pretend I never existed, which was fine. Then I'd make sure the world knew exactly who I was, and that they were the ones who lost me. I didn't want to burn down the house. That would have been too easy, too fast. I wanted something slower, smarter, and more permanent, so I began planning. The first step was research, and I spent the next week looking into property records, who owned the house, and what their finances were like. Using a few publicly available databases, I discovered something interesting. The mortgage wasn't paid off, and they were a few months behind, which raised questions about why they were selling. I filed that information away. I called Milo, an old high school classmate who used to run a tech club and now works freelance in cybersecurity. We weren't close, but I knew 2 things about him. He hated bullies and he owed me a favor from years ago when I covered for him during a plagiarism accusation. We met for coffee, and I put out a version of the tale, not the entire thing, but the main points. "What do you need?" he inquired. I need access to the real estate records. Possible seller disclosures. Any correspondence that I can discover. I want to know what they're concealing. Milo cracked his knuckles. Give me 48 hours. He finished in 36. My parents had listed the house without disclosing a major plumbing issue that had started in the basement, which could cost thousands of dollars to fix. The documents were forged, not just misleading, but also illegal. I saved every file, printed copies, and uploaded backups to encrypted cloud storage. The evidence was there, but I didn't want to blow it all at once. In the meantime, I contacted the college administration office to confirm something I'd been quietly working on for months. I was eligible to transfer into a full scholarship program due to my GPA and work-study contributions, and they invited me to speak at the fall orientation as a first-generation student. That's when the idea struck me. What if I invited them? Not directly, of course, but what if they saw me standing on a stage holding a scholarship certificate, announced to an audience as someone they'd given up on? And what if, right around that same time, the buyers for their house backed out and someone reported their fraudulent documents? What if everything they'd built their image on started to crack? Not because I screamed, but because I succeeded, because I smiled, and then made it clear that they were never part of the journey. That was the setup, and I wasn't done yet. I had one more card to play, a name, Luke. He was still their golden boy, their pride and joy, but I knew things about him that they didn't. Old screenshots, messages he sent from the school-issued iPad when he was 17, joking about borrowing money from my father's wallet and blaming the maid. I hadn't used any of it yet, but I would if they pushed, because I didn't need to ruin their lives. I just needed them to watch me build mine without them, brick by brick, speech by speech. Comments about not completing community service hours and having a friend sign attendance forms were minor until they were packaged together and handed to a college admissions committee. And then, when the moment was right, I dropped the match, quiet, controlled, undeniable, and walked away, not bitter, not broken, just free. I didn't want the ending to be loud, not a scene, not a tantrum, but quiet, measured, like placing the final stone on a grave, and that's exactly how it turned out. The first domino to fall was the house sale. I carefully timed everything, waited until the buyers had gone through inspection, financing, and all the drawn-out steps. And then I sent them a small anonymous package via a third-party forwarding service that guaranteed no return address. The flash drive contained images of the basement flooding caused by the old sump pump, screenshots of the fraudulent disclosure paperwork, and a penned message that said, "This house has a secret. The sellers did not repair it, instead, they covered it up. If you sign the contract, the problem is yours. Think twice. Ask the agent about the sump pump and watch what happens." The consequences were immediate. My parents, who were already behind on their mortgage, were about to face foreclosure if they couldn't find a new buyer in time, but they couldn't fudge the paperwork this time. Because the plumbing issue had been legally and publicly flagged. 3 days later, the house disappeared from Zillow and the listing went dark. I didn't even have to lift a finger after that, I just watched. Meanwhile, I said yes to the orientation speech, and the school had arranged for a local news crew to film parts of it for a segment on community success stories. I didn't expect it to be a big deal, just a 5-minute slot on a sleepy Sunday newscast. But what I didn't anticipate was the article. A few days after the orientation, someone from the city college board contacted me and asked if they could publish my story on their website. I said yes, expecting a paragraph, but they ran a complete profile, photo interview and everything. From Dawn to Dean's List, Ethan Lane's journey from abandonment to academic triumph was dramatic. It was a little too dramatic, to be honest, but it was real, and it spread. People shared it. Old classmates, teachers, neighbors, and eventually, my parents. I found out through a second-hand Facebook comment that someone screenshotted and texted to me. This article is filled with exaggerations. Some kids just don't appreciate how much their family sacrifices for them, my mother said, passive-aggressive, anonymous enough to appear inconspicuous, but unmistakably hers. She was spinning, and I wasn't done yet because Luke, the golden child, had just begun applying to transfer institutions. And I still had those screenshots. I didn't want to ruin his future, but I did want to send a warning shot. So I sent a short anonymous email to the admissions office of the school he was aiming for, containing only a few lines about falsified community service records, a suspicious paper trail of attendance forms, and a history of academic oversights. I attached 3 old screenshots of him joking about it, and I signed it for the integrity of your academic program. It didn't matter if they acted on it or not. What mattered was that Luke would meet someone new and never feel untouchable again. Now here's what I didn't expect. They came to me separately, rather than together. First, it was my father, who arrived at the university assistant's desk one Tuesday morning, eyes bloodshot, tie loose, face weary. "Ethan," he started. "We need to talk." I gazed at him calmly and steadily. "You mean now that the house is unsellable and Luke's applications are falling apart?" I said quietly. He blinked as if he hadn't expected me to acknowledge it. "We didn't know it had gotten this bad," he told me. "You've made your point. Okay. We get it." "No," I said. "You don't. That's how it got this far." He attempted again. "We can fix it. Maybe come home. Let's talk this through." I smiled, little and chilly. "There is no home," I said. "You burned that bridge and sold the ashes." Then I turned and went away. He did not follow. 2 weeks later, my mother sent me a letter. No envelope, just a piece of paper slid under the flat door in the middle of the night. "Ethan, I realize now that we committed mistakes, but you're being harsh. Punishing us like way doesn't make you better than us. Please, this is your family." "Mom." I did not answer. Instead, I tried something different. I emailed her a simple snapshot. I am standing in front of the college banner, carrying my scholarship award. Smiling. I added on the reverse. "This is what consequences look like." That was the last communication I ever sent to them. Since then, the house has been foreclosed on. Luke transferred, but not to the school he preferred. And my parents relocated to a smaller, older rental house 2 counties away, with a lawn they don't show photographs of. I, for one, am doing well. Graduated with honors. I started working with a group that assists first-generation kids in navigating college without the assistance of their families. I mentor children who feel invisible, just like I did. I have a new apartment, a puppy, a full fridge, and friends who have chosen me. And I have never had to look back. My vengeance was not loud. It did not come with slamming doors or shouting battles. It arrived with silent breezes, inexorable progress, and the type of success that you construct brick by brick while everyone else is looking for a collapse. The nicest thing is that they'll spend the rest of their lives pretending they didn't lose a son, whilst I'll spend the rest of mine never needing them again. I was not the disappointment in that house. I was the escape artist they never noticed.